In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplin Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Now, today we're going to wrap up our study in the book of Ruth. I know you're crying, you're upset, and I understand it. It's been a great study. I have really enjoyed our time in the book of Ruth, but today is the last day. We're going to go ahead and kind of wrap it up. So just to give you a little idea of where we are in the story, this is in the last part of Ruth. Boaz has already made sure that he followed the law, made sure everything worked out, talked to the next of kin, made sure that he didn't want the land and he didn't want to take Ruth. And when he said, well, I'll take the land, but he said, well, now it's a package deal. You're going to redeem the land. You also have to take the man's, the deceased wife and bear children to her. He says, yeah, that's going to be a problem with me for my own inheritance. So I tell you what, you take the land, you redeem it, and then you redeem Ruth and you take her to wife. And that's exactly what Boaz wanted in the first place. We saw that from his earlier conversation. And so Boaz agrees. And the point is, he made sure that everything was right before he went ahead and engaged in this ritual with Ruth. And so we see the culmination of this whole thing come up in Ruth 4:13 through 15. And it says there, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her. And the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Then when the women said to Naomi, blessed is the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Now, this shows a couple things. First of all, that's very high praise for Naomi. Because keep in mind, this was a society that valued sons much more so than daughters. And they say to Naomi, this daughter-in-law that you have, she is better to you than 7 sons, because she loves you, she takes care of you, she makes sure that you have everything that you need, and she is now going to bear a child to you, which has a blood relation to her, because keep in mind, she was Abimelech's mother, but she is also related to Boaz. And so her family lineage will, in a sense, continue on through Boaz and Ruth. And the people in the community around her are acknowledging this and saying, wow, look at what the Lord has done for Naomi. He has provided her Ruth, and she has been able to bless Naomi and bless Boaz through this. So this is sort of the fairy tale ending that everybody wanted to this story, and that's a good thing. Sometimes you get those fairy tale endings. Sometimes God provides that, and that's a wonderful thing when that happens. But let's ask the question, how did we get here? Because it's not as though a fairy godmother came down and made everything right. It took us a while to get to this point. And we saw a lot of hardship coming from Ruth and Naomi to be able to get to this point. So let's ask the question, how exactly did we get here? First of all, you've got Naomi. She had faith in God, and because of that, she wanted to return to her people and return to Israel. And because she wanted to follow God and follow his command, even though she felt a little bit betrayed by God, and we saw that earlier in our study as well, she felt a little bit abandoned, she still had faith that God was going to take care of her. Even though she didn't see how or why at the time, she had faith and said, you know what, I'm going back to Israel, I'm going to be with God's people. And we see that it actually wound up working out pretty well for Naomi. Because of that, and because of her daughter-in-law that stayed with her, and because of Boaz, she wound up being very blessed. Then we have Ruth. Ruth had faith in God, and that because of that, she had the faith because of Naomi and her husband's example. She had faith and she said, you know what, my God is going to be your God. I'm going to go with you. I'll remain loyal to you, and I'm going to follow the precepts of the law of Moses, and I'm going to sojourn in this land that is not mine and be amongst God's people. And so because Ruth had this amazing faith in God and in Naomi, who is really the medium by which she came to know God through Naomi and her husband, eventually because of her faith, Ruth was also rewarded with a son and a husband. And Ruth was also faithful because she understood how to look for a husband. She was seeking out a godly man that would care for her, that would provide for her, and to protect her. And because she was looking for the right things and looking at the things that God would want her to look for in a husband, then she was blessed with a husband that fulfilled all of those things and really kind of went over the top on that. He wasn't only able to provide, but he was very wealthy. He wasn't only good at protecting her, he was excellent at it and had the means to do so. And so Ruth, because of her great faith and because she started looking for the right things in a husband, she was very, very blessed in that and was blessed with a son as well. And Boaz, he had faith in God, so he looked for a godly woman and made sure he was in compliance with God's law before he married her. See, we see that Boaz has a desire to marry Ruth not long after they meet. It happened in the whole meeting that happened on the threshing floor with her sleeping at his feet. You remember that from the other day. Well, that's where Boaz wanted to marry Ruth, but he said to himself, I am not going to violate God's law no matter what I want. God's law is more important than my desire for Ruth. And because of that, he did the right thing and made sure he followed the correct steps. And luckily, it wound up working out for him to where he did get to marry the person that he wanted. He did get to marry Ruth. And so you have three people here who all had amazing faith in God that not only believed but took action based on that belief. And because of that, all three of them were a blessing both to each other. And then we'll see a little bit later in this same passage, they also became a blessing to Israel and to the world. Because through Ruth and Boaz's child, who became the grandfather of King David, we saw Israel prosper, the kingdom came together, and Israel was never larger than it was during the reign of David and Solomon. David was Israel's greatest king. He produced Solomon, who also became a great king, and Israel was never as large before then, and it was never large afterward. They had more territory, more wealth. They were doing better under them than they did at any other time in their history. And then we also see that because of that, they are also a part of the line of Christ, because Christ is the seed of David. And so we can see that they not only blessed all of Israel through their faithfulness, they blessed the entire world, because it was through their lineage that the salvation of all mankind came to fruition. What an amazing blessing to be able to have that lineage and to be able to say that you were a part of that process. There's a reason that we're still studying about them thousands of years after they've died. And I would like to use that to point to us, to say we never understand the real scope of how much our faith means to people. Thousands of years later, something that we did may have played a role, something that we were saying to God, I will remain faithful, I will obey your will, just like Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. That may have a tremendous impact on the world that we don't even see. It's amazing that a faithful person can have an impact on thousands or millions of people, or in the case of Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi, the entire human race. It is a really humbling thought to believe that our faithful actions and our obedience to God can impact the entire world. But that's really the lesson that Ruth gives us. Stay the course, friends.